Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for attending our event today. Welcome to the Center for Black Diaspora's event. Today, I'm really happy to be hosting Dr. Valerie C. Johnson, Dr. Jennifer Ruth, and Dr. Ellen Schreckner, who will be discussing their book, The Right to Learn, Resisting the Right-Wing Attack on Freedom. This has been long in the planning, so I'm glad it all came together and the timing is perfect. I am Julie Moody Freeman, the director for the Center for Black Diaspora. Thanks so much to our guests today and to Anne Russa, the director for the Women's Center, who is co-organizing this event with us. A big shout out to all of you who have zoomed in to be with us today. So happy. I want to quickly, we want to get started because we know what we're here for. I want to quickly, though, thank two people who helped me to make this event possible. Maya Jefferson, who is the Center for Black Diaspora's Marketing and Content Development Assistant. And I'd also like to thank Jennifer Gardner, very appreciative of you, the Assistant Director for the Center for Black Diaspora. And I will turn you all over to Jennifer so that she can introduce Dr. Valerie Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's programming. I'm excited to introduce this phenomenal woman who have driven the center to promote this book, and she will then introduce her co-host. Dr. Valerie C. Johnson is the Associate Provost for DEI. She is also an Associate Professor of Political Science and an Endowed Professor of Urban Diplomacy at the Gray School of Applied Diplomacy at DePaul University here in Chicago, Illinois. Dr. Johnson's research and teaching explore the intersections of race and class. Her publications include Black Power in the Suburbs, The Myth of Reality of African American Suburban Political Incorporation and Power in the City. Dr. Johnson is the former National Education spokesperson for Reverend Dr. Jesse L. Jackson Sr. and the Rainbow Push Coalition, and has served as a consultant for numerous elected officials and community organizations. We thank Dr. Johnson for helping us host this event, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Julie, for this opportunity. We've been talking about this for a while. The book actually came out on April the 4th. And so I am just so happy to have an opportunity to talk about this subject at a time like this. I mean, obviously, universities across the country are dealing with the issue of academic freedom. And so it gives me no greater pleasure than to introduce to you what I refer to as my dream team. Okay. First, Jennifer Ruth. She is an associate dean in the College of Arts and professor in the School of Film at Portland State University. She has written about academic freedom. As a matter of fact, as I'll show you her book cover in a second, she has literally wrote the book on academic freedom. And she has published in such journals as New Republic, Truth Out, Academe, Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Education, Ms. Her most recent book, other than this one actually, is co-written with Michael Barabee, and it's entitled, It's Not Free Speech, Race, Democracy, and the Future of Academic Freedom. Next, the other part of the dream team is Ellen Schrecker. Ellen is well known for her scholarship on McCarthyism and higher education. She is a retired professor of history at Yeshiva University. Her latest book project, other than this, is The Lost Promise, American Universities in the 1960s. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on with the agenda. We want to give you, the audience, an opportunity to ask questions. The chat feature will be on. And of course, throughout the year, we will have several conversations about academic freedom and other issues like free speech. We know the barrage, the onslaught, in fact, of executive orders coming from President Trump will necessitate a discussion about academic freedom and free speech, and certainly a host of other issues. I want to say, and this is not a commercial, but I am so proud to say that DePaul and the Office of Academic Affairs, our provost, Sama Ghanem, is dedicated. We are dedicated to academic freedom. So let me go on with the agenda. Introductions, we already went there. In a second, Jennifer is going to talk about academic freedom and how it differs from free speech, impetus and summary of the book. The faculty, which is the Faculty Senate campaign, I'll talk about that. Is the assault on academic freedom a new phenomenon? The contemporary impetus of the battle over academic freedom and the aftermath. What's at stake? And finally, a question that we always ask at DePaul: what must be done? And that is, of course, the critical question. As I mentioned, my co-editors, they have an esteemed publication record. Ellen Schreckner, Dr. Ellen Schreckner, has literally wrote the book on McCarthyism. And so she is an expert on how this current assault on academic freedom differs from McCarthyism. Jennifer Ruth, as I mentioned, she wrote the book on academic freedom. In her book, It's Not Free Speech. I have written mainly on race and various DEI related issues. So together we form the dream team. We are probably some of the most dedicated proponents of academic freedom. The three of us have served on Committee A, which is the national committee on of the National AAUP that adjudicates academic freedom violations at universities across the country. Unfortunately, Jennifer and I, we had to step off of Committee A due to our academic, administrative rather, appointments. Ellen, however, remains on Committee A. So Jennifer, tell us, what is the difference? What is academic freedom and how does it differ from free speech? Jennifer Ruth? Oh, okay. It's two Jennifers on this Zoom.
Okay. Sorry, I muted myself earlier and then it wouldn't allow me to unmute. So now it's allowing me to unmute. Thank you, Val. And first of all, thank you so much for having us and for organizing Jennifer and Julie. And it's so great to be with, you started to say, Jennifer, that we were Val's cohort, and that's pretty apt. I definitely feel like Ellen and I are Valerie's cohort. That sounds good. I'm very happy to be back with my cohort. All right, so free speech, we don't have a lot of time. So free speech versus academic freedom. So the book that Val just brought up, we literally want, in order to make such a hard distinction between things that are often conflated, we literally entitled our book, It's Not Free Speech, speaking about academic freedom. Because what was scaring us was the way in which opinions, well, that's alternative facts, these kinds of things were supposed to have equal weight with scholarship and research that had been vetted. And so we were trying to sort of help redefine, not redefine, help get into the more of a popular understanding of academic freedom in order to preserve some sense of expertise and scholarship, in order to have the ability to distinguish between good ideas and bad ideas. Mm-hmm. Colonialism, bad idea. Democracy, good idea, right? So if we don't have an ability to distinguish between them and we don't have anyone to turn to, I mean, I'm just going to quickly, you have on the slide the distinction between, in free speech, First Amendment, all viewpoint neutrality, all ideas are supposedly equal, good and bad ones. And academic freedom, of course, if you're being hired to teach, and presumably and hopefully your materials are being looked at by peers and you're scholarship is being looked at, then you're actually being judged. Are you a good teacher? Do you know your stuff? Are you saying things that make sense according to the discipline? So it's not about equality of ideas. It's about distinguishing how the good ideas from bad ones and how you get there, teaching students how to get there. And the other thing is free speech rights are typically individual based. They're seen as individual based. And to a large extent, academic freedom has sort of, as a term, has devolved into a kind of general sense. People have a general sense that it's also an individual freedom of the professor. But again, it's part of a bigger collective of a discipline. So the idea isn't that someone can come up to a department and say, I want to teach physics. They have to be their CV, their work, their PhD in physics, all those things have to be looked at by other peers, and then they have to be hired. So it's not just opinion. To distinguish between expertise and opinion feels very important right now, because there is a sense that with the attack on higher ed, the delegitimization of higher ed, that scholars are just simply spouting our opinions, and there's nothing to distinguish them from anyone else's. And that's a dangerous place to be for a democracy that needs to rely on some legitimate knowledge, some vetted knowledge, and not just politics and biased agendas.
Okay. Jennifer, could you please tell us a couple things? Number one, what is the role of academic freedom and shared governance, as well as extramural speech?
Okay, so academic freedom and shared governance has to do with the fact that in many places there are something called university senates or faculty assembly, and there's things like curriculum committees and so undergraduate curriculum, graduate curriculum, and the idea is that there's some due diligence and responsible sort of oversight of how our universities are governing, are managing themselves, and what programs we're bringing into being, what programs we're phasing out, that there's thoughtful processes going along with that. And so to a large extent, that should be the freedom of the university assembly, faculty senate, curriculum committee with the professors from that area. They should be able to determine that, not a politician. So not a Ron DeSantis, not somebody saying critical race theory is bogus. So that when the political onslaught against academic freedom started, what you had is a complete denial of any kind of autonomy of the profession to govern itself and to determine for itself what's important to teach and what's not important to teach. And so the shared governance is part of that. It's not just one person saying, I want to teach about critical race theory. It was a vetted field that had, a history. So what we're seeing right now is the attempt to deny shared governance and academic freedom as a collective right of faculty.
Okay. And so
extramural speech. I didn't answer extramural.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to ask whether faculty retain their free speech, and is that protected by academic freedom?
So technically, and this was certainly the consensus when Michael Berube and I finished our book. I don't know if AAUP has, which is sort of the kind of default common law for a lot of this stuff. I don't know if anything's changed on this, but technically it's kind of confusing and paradoxical. Extramural speech, faculty are supposed to have the same rights as anybody, especially if I want to go on to my I'm not on Twitter, thank God. But if I were, and I were to go on there and I wanted to talk about the abortion I had when I was 20, that's my private right. That's my private right to do that. However, if I talk about something relating to my teaching and my research, then if I say something out if I'm astronomer, if I'm an astronomer and I say the moon is made of blue cheese on my Twitter, my peers and my faculty in the department might understandably be like, she lost her mind? What is she teaching in the classroom? Perhaps maybe we should take a look at what she's doing in the classroom. So actually, we have freedom of speech extramurally, but that doesn't mean we can say whatever we want.
Okay, thank you so much. And like I said, we'll be talking about this more and more. We have a task force on academic freedom, chaired by Scott Payeth. And we will continue to talk about this as, of course, universities around the countries are besieged and beset with academic freedom violations and concerns. Okay, the impetus and summary of the book. As Jennifer Ruth indicates in chapter 8 of our book, and it's entitled The Resolutions, Mobilizing Faculty Senates to Defend Academic Freedom. The impetus of the book, or the beginning, the sort of roots of it, if you will, was born out by a project that Jennifer, myself, and Ellen participated in. It was a project that was started by the African American Policy Forum, which is an organization headed by Kimberly Crenshaw. I'll never forget, I was in Target in Buffalo, New York, and Sumi Cho, who was an executive for the African American Policy Forum, called me asking me whether I would work with Jennifer Ruth on a national campaign to sort of alert faculty senates across the country about these violations, these education gag orders that were taking root in red states. And so Jennifer and I, we got together, and also Emily Ho, who's a law school professor at University of Connecticut, and then Ellen. And so we began this campaign. And I have to say, Jennifer, oh my God, Jennifer was like unbelievable with this. She was the lead. And ultimately, we were able to convince 63 colleges and universities across the nation in 37 states to join us in getting their faculty senates, their faculty councils to pass resolutions reasserting their value for academic freedom, right? And so I am so proud to say that DePaul University was the first university in this nationwide campaign on September 21st, 2021, when this all kind of started. We were able to pass a resolution. Jennifer, I think she was number 2.
Real estate, yeah.
Yep. And then it just spread across the nation. We did a lot of talks with the African American Policy Forum and elsewhere on this trend, right? And so that was sort of the roots of the book. Ellen ended up writing a Nation magazine piece. And she got, a lot of interest about that. She basically, the Nation piece was about this national campaign to alert faculty that these violations were occurring. State legislatures telling faculty what to teach, or administrators telling faculty what to teach. Of course, that became sort of like a group speak, if you will. If the legislatures and board of trustees can tell you what to teach, then, I mean, my God, why do they hire faculty with various expertise? And again, we want to avoid group speak. So Ellen, one day she reached out to Jennifer and I, and she says, hey, let's do a book. And so we did a book. And as you can see here, the table of contents, we considered the book as a call to all faculty, an alert to all faculty. We had the pleasure of having Irene Mulvey, who was at the time the president of the AAUP, to write the foreword. Part 1, the current culture war. Part 2, white rage, twisted laws, and patriarchal control. Part 3, collective action, invisible resistance. And there the book was born. And I tell you, I've never worked on any writing project that was such an ease. And I think because we just had a zealousness, if there is such a word, for the topic and realized that the book needed to be out for such a time as this. Ellen, tell us, is the assault on academic freedom a new phenomenon?
Well, as I said on page 17, no. There has always been a suspicion of academic work, of independent intellectual work within American society. And it goes back really to the beginnings of the modern university uh, at the sort of turn of the century, between the 19th and 20th century, when universities began to do research. That was the big change. And some people were doing research on social problems even then, and they got into trouble. And they got into trouble at schools like the University of Chicago or Stanford or Brown. Why? Because the boards of trustees consisted mainly of rich people, no different than today, of course. And they didn't like to hear that people who go on strike, workers who go on strike, were going on strike for very good reasons, like they were underpaid, there was no safety, and the factories were unsafe, things like that. And so there were a number of what we now would call academic freedom violations. In other words, people who were being fired for their academic work or their what we call extramural utterances, speaking out to the public about things often related to their own expertise as scholars. And the AAUP, this organization, the American Association of University Professors, was founded at this time in the early 19 teens, I guess. It's over 100 years old. And they essentially defined academic freedom, as Jennifer pointed out, as this combination of sort of free speech, of ability to speak in your discipline. Peer review is terribly important. Faculty governance, making sure that faculty members have control over their own professional work, that teaching and research doesn't get prescribed from down on high, which is going to tell you that slavery was beloved by the slaves. Well, that is, I think, what we would call BS, or, whatever. So anyhow, there has always been this hostility to those of us who dare to speak truth to power, as it were, and to who do it often in the form of books and classes and lectures, etc. Now, up until recently, we usually think about McCarthyism as that moment in history that was the worst episode of an attack on academic freedom in higher education ever. And that was the case until now. And when we look back at McCarthyism, it's sort of a little nostalgic. Oh, is that all? But I did my research. I went out and interviewed a lot of people who lost their jobs for political reasons during the McCarthy period. And what's interesting and what's different from today is that the witch hunters during the McCarthy Cold War Red Scare were not asking the professors who were appearing at congressional hearings or on FBI files or anything. They were not being questioned about their teaching and research. All that McCarthyism was looking at was these people's usually previous associations with communism. That was it. The McCarthyism dealt with communism. Well, today, what are they dealing with? They're dealing with books, they're dealing with accreditation, they're asking people about, are they teaching about gender or ethnic studies? It's everything that is going on in the modern university, except perhaps for the football teams. And it's much, much worse. And it's worse because, as I said, the scope is so much bigger. Everything that is going on within the university is under attack. But the other reason is that the universities themselves are in a much weaker position to fight back. During the McCarthy years in the late 1940s and 1950s and early 60s, the universities and colleges in the United States were experiencing what many people, historians at least, call the golden age of higher education. It was a period when universities were expanding, doubling in size, tripling in size. New schools are being founded. Small teachers' colleges are becoming master degrees, giving master degrees, becoming universities, becoming regional universities. So you're getting an enormous upgrading and expansion. And universities had a lot of clout and a lot of prestige, and people looked up to us, if you can believe that. But then the United States experienced the 60s. And how did the 60s change the status quo? It was a major social movement designed to democratize American society. And the important thing that ended McCarthyism, because there was a Red Scare, people were scared to talk about controversial topics in their classes during the 50s, just as they certainly are today. But all of a sudden, people no longer cared very much about the Reds under the beds because there weren't any. And all of a sudden, there was a massive social movement coming from the African American community. There was the civil rights movement forcing the United States at every level to reckon with its racist past. And there was backlash, is essentially what occurred in response. It always has happened throughout the history of the United States whenever there is a democratic movement that tries to overcome the racist oppression of the American past. There's a backlash, and we're living in that backlash now.
So, Ellen, so you say here in this quote, and certainly you chronicled this in your chapter, but McCarthyism was different in that it never directly reached into the classroom.
Exactly. Nobody was ever asked about what are you teaching? Why are you teaching that? You're teaching about African American history, but that doesn't count. That people were ignoring the American past. And that changed in the 60s. And it's people who were very happy, like Southern segregationists, with the Jim Crow system that existed before, went on the offensive. And it took.
It really amazes me, Ellen, that you think about this sort of quest for white supremacy then, the quest for white supremacy now. There is a clear line, point A, point B, point C in all of this. Jennifer, could you give us a little information about the contemporary impetus for this movement? This current assault on academic freedom?
Yeah, and I would just add, which is very bold of me to add anything to what Ellen said, but I would just add that also the Red Scare was partially also international socialists and communist parties were typically much more progressive around race than others. And so race mixing was, equality was being, people were saying, the segregationists, the conservatives, the white supremacists were saying that equality is a euphemism for race mixing. So that was an element there as well. But Ellen brings us up to the moment perfectly in terms of the backlash to DEI and critical race theory, very much following upon the heels of a multiracial, widespread protest against police brutality and police killing. It had been building with Black Lives Matter since what, 2015, 2014, but and a series of deaths at the hands of police, of Black young men, usually, also Black women. And then when we all got to see with our own eyes the impunity with which Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd, it just unleashed something. And all of a sudden you had the 1619 Project was selling well. Ibram Kendi's book was selling well. There was really something powerful happening. In fact, I'm going to space on his name, but he's at UT Austin, but he called it the third Reconstruction. So this idea that we were in a third Reconstruction, that we've never fully achieved Reconstruction because, of course, the backlash and the Jim Crow and slavery by another name. The third Reconstruction there's this moment of possibility. And that, as Ellen mentioned, when there's any kind of progress, it seems to provoke a fierce and ferocious backlash of white supremacy. And yeah.
Okay, so as you all can see by this chart, there were a number of things that occurred once, we had this last reckoning of sorts, particularly after the death of the murder, I should say, of George Floyd. You had protests in over 60 countries, 7 continents, and with all of these protests, people started getting afraid. And it's like, uh-oh, we need to do something about this DEI stuff. We need to do something about this LGBTQIA stuff. We need to do something about this women's stuff because all of a sudden these groups were feared and obviously caused a threat to patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy.
Yeah, and I would add that also what has been going on since the 60s and part of the backlash that had been sort of secret until maybe 10 years ago was that a sort of cohort of wealthy, libertarian, bigoted billionaires was creating a counter set of institutions. They wanted to get rid of expert knowledge. Why? Many of them were oil tycoons. They certainly didn't want to see the end of oil and gas, even if the planet was going to burn up. And so they are funding a massive attack, the culture wars, we call them, I think, on academic expertise. And that's part of it as well. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to delegitimize academic expertise, academic knowledge, academic values like truth. And they were extremely successful in diverting attention away from the real problems like climate change, like racial disparities in healthcare or anything in healthcare, and manage to make universities that had once been highly respected now sort of suspect. We're teaching, critical race theory, and that has really, really poisoned the American people to such an extent that you now have the Vice President of the United States talking about the academic community as, quote unquote, the enemy.
Yeah. So, Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about the education gag order? First, what is a education gag order? And a little bit about the work that PEN America has done chronicling these gag
Sure.
orders.
So, Trump did an executive order right before the end of his first term. And it was about abolishing diversity, equity, inclusion trainings in professional, in civil servant kind of situations. And Biden instantly rescinded it. And then it just metastasized at the state level. So politicians in red states picked it up and tried to enforce a similar kinds of orders and gag orders within their state, and were remarkably successful. So that you had Florida and Texas were particularly aggressive in this way in going after DEI and critical race theory and any kind of racial justice work. And it spread, and it did shocking, these gag orders, which when they first were beginning to be discussed and in the press, among people I was talking to, there was a kind of sense that this is unreal, and almost a kind of contempt and dismissive attitude about these gag orders, because the prevailing attitude was, this will never stand up in courts. We have free speech and First Amendment. And free speech and First Amendment did not protect us, which is the other reason why it's important to distinguish between free speech and academic freedom and professional autonomy, of scholarly autonomy. But yeah, there was a sense that there's no way these are gonna succeed, and yet they did. PEN America did a particularly good job of tracking all of these orders.
Say something, Jennifer, if you will, about divisive concepts.
So-called divisive concepts. So it's been a minute since I have been doing research on educational gag orders and writing about that. Those of you out there, I just finished a film called The Palestine Exception: What's at Stake in the Campus Protests. So my head has really been around suppression of academic freedom and free speech around speech in solidarity with Palestinians and Gaza. But the divisive concepts was this idea that if you talk about, quite literally, you talk about the history of slavery, that you are making white students uncomfortable potentially. This is fundamentally what was at the heart of it, and it was pretty much this brazen and overt. You're making white students uncomfortable, and we don't want that, and it's being divisive. So history itself, essentially, and these divisive concepts, kind of gag orders, is divisive. Not something that we have to study in order to do better, not that it's patriotic to study history and figure out how to improve, but that studying history is divisive if you're honest about that history of social privilege, racial disparities, etc.
Yes.
Yeah, there are states that have passed laws like in Texas where certain words are no longer going to be allowed in people's curriculum or in their reading lists. Words like, what is it, colonialism or race even. And, it's making people dumb is what it is. They're not going to be able to understand the world around them if during their educations they're not able to use words even that describe that society.
Yes, and certainly Florida's, what is it? Don't Say Gay. Actually, the chapter that we have in the book written on Florida was written by three of our faculty in women and gender studies. And it's excellent. I hope you all buy the book, not to, pad our coffers. We won't be making much money off the book. You know how academic books are. But I hope you do. And of course, spread the information in the book around, because it was written by not only scholars in, race, gender, sexual identity, American history, but also deans of College of Education to talk about some of the challenges that they're facing. adjunct faculty who, in fact, were feeling the pressure of maybe not saying certain things because they are vulnerable when it comes to, of course, getting contracts. So, Jennifer, could you go ahead and talk about the disregard that these bills have for? Go ahead. You could just kind of sum
Yeah,
up that.
I think it really speaks to what Ellen said earlier, that we almost can look nostalgically back at McCarthyism relative to this moment, because it's so widespread and it's such an assault on education, K through 12 education and it's an assault on our First Amendment rights too. It absolutely is. So if it's the weaponization of the law and the weaponization to some extent of civil rights law, paradoxically and ironically, and discrimination laws, in order to say, so it was free speech for the Ku Klux Klan to march. They had a First Amendment right. But if you're now talking about a race in a way that feels like it's racist to whites, it can be construed, I think we're in this territory now, we're heading in this territory, it will be construed as racist. So, I mean, there was a talk in the 90s about reverse racism. We don't even hear that phrase anymore. But we're in a world now where the most privileged groups, the wealthiest groups, the whitest groups are able to weaponize the law, weaponize history, so that we see the attack on DEI right now. It's not just abolishing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts on campuses. It's actually going after civil rights stuff at this point. It's if you're teaching civil rights history, that means you're doing DEI. So it's a total disregard for all of the sort of principles and also hard-earned constitutional protections and institutional things like tenure that have been built up in the university system.
Yes. Some of the newer tactics, Jennifer, and these are from PEN America's, this report. If you all are interested in this slide deck, certainly contact Jennifer and Maya and Julie for it. But PEN America, they've come out with a report late last year. I think it was in October 2024. They talk about some of the newer tactics associated with this quest to suppress education, so it's like, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, so let me do the tactic 1 and then let you
Okay.
two do tactic 2 and 3. Tactic 1, this notion of viewpoint diversity, the idea, so part of the smearing of higher ed is this idea that we're all woke, we all have a certain viewpoint and we're indoctrinating our students, and we need to get other viewpoints into the classroom and onto faculty rosters. And I mean, on the face of it, that seems very benign. There should be diversity of ideas in higher education. But in reality, what it is exactly what the previous slide said, a disregard for the academic processes and the fact that, and a kind of a misrepresentation, a distortion and misrepresentation that suggests, for example, I always think about, I've been on many search committees to hire faculty. Never once has anyone said, are they a Democrat or Republican when we're looking at their work? We look at their work and we say, does this work that we need in the department? Is this good work? Is this an area of scholarship that we're weak on and we need to be stronger? There's all kinds of calculations that go into maintaining departments with some integrity around curriculum. And viewpoint diversity is a pretty Orwellian term for something much more ham-handed, which is to force conservative scholarship, reaction, and in some cases, not even scholarship, just reactionary, in some cases scholarship, conservative scholarship, but in some cases just reactionary viewpoints in order to create a facade of diversity. And it's diversity, ideological diversity. It's not other kinds of diversity.
Now, other thing that's happening, of course, and it's part of destroying faculty governance, is that these wealthy philanthropists, right-wing philanthropists, are going up to the administrations of universities all over saying, how would you like to have a new center for the study of the
Absolutely.
enterprise? And they don't consult the faculty. So they send 3 right-wing economists to a school, and lo and behold, that has legitimized it, even though these people may in fact be teaching that what gold and silver and cyber dollars are the only ways that now you can have money or something like that. You know, so it's all interconnected, and it's downgrading the faculty in every way. And that when you have a faculty that isn't free, that isn't able to uh, express their own findings that they've spent years researching, because it doesn't fit into what the trustees now want, you're ending academic freedom.
Yeah, I'm thinking about when the robber barons would, sort of try to create programs around the beauties, the wonders, the greatness of capitalism, right? And so it's like that's where exactly where we are right now, where there's an ideological perspective, and throughout Project 2025, they talk about how, of course, you want to teach the virtues of capitalism. And so they don't want any critique of capitalism, and so it's certainly all about that as well. So tactic 2, exerting ideological control over university governance, decision making to undermine the support structures. um, Ellen mentioned that. DEI restrictions, as I always say, I've become fond of saying DEI is us, right? DEI protects a number of groups who have historically found been discriminated against in employment practices, et cetera. What it does, it treats DEI as about solely about race, when in fact, in eliminating DEI, really you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Because I recall before October 7th, one of the more salient issues with DEI was actually disability, right? And certainly LGBTQIA concerns. So that's certainly problematic. But again, it is trying to ensure that there is no critique of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. You want to go with tactic 3, Ellen?
Which is
Informal ways that government officials bully, threaten. I guess we've kind of covered that, because obviously, if
no,
they're
I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're now calling, and all of a sudden it's so chic, uh, anticipatory obedience. And we're about to see it big time on all of our campuses, because Trump has just, I think, delivered an order demanding that foreign students be deported. Okay, now what does that mean? Are the deans going to send lists of their foreign students to ICE? Are they going to kick them out of their dorm rooms?
undocumented students.
Not undocumented. I don't think it's just undocumented.
Okay.
I mean, I just heard about it because we have a house guest who's involved at Columbia, and they are terrified.
Wow. Now that, I mean, it's something new every single day. It's hard to actually keep up.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in effect, it is sort of like a bullying. The way this has rolled out, it feels so heavy-handed, where it's like people are literally afraid. There is it's actually terror.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I think a lot about when I walk into my classroom. I'm teaching Chinese cinema this term. And so I'm teaching a lot about the difference between Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China, and CCP versus the umbrella movement versus Taiwan independence versus. So as because that's actually really integral to the nation, even when they're not a nation. Hong Kong's not a nation, but to their sense of their film history. I think, there's certain films that are really canonical because they speak to Hong Kongness, not Chineseness, right? So anyway, I'm talking about that a lot. And I think every day I think about if I'm disrespectful to our president, if I say not my president, or if I'm disrespectful, will someone file a complaint or a grievance? So when you have to show respect or pretend respect where you don't have it, that's called fear. That's called I mean, I've never experienced the chilling effect more directly. I'd had it in other forms in terms of talking about abortion or other things that I would have to sort of work hard to make it related to the subject matter. But it's profoundly a chilling effect right now.
Mhm. And then particularly for faculty who are adjunct faculty and term faculty, those who do not have the protection of tenure. Ellen?
Yeah, and I'm going to say that tenure isn't going to protect people with tenure.
No.
Yeah.
It didn't during the McCarthy period, and I haven't, what Columbia is doing just did to, it's a very outspoken law school professor, Catherine Franke. They're trying to get rid of a, long time full professor, major person in her field, and they just want her out. Why? We're talking about the Palestine exception yet again. She supports the Palestinian students. Well, now, thank you, Donald Trump. There will be no more Palestinian students in American universities. And I am sure that the top administrators will take a deep breath and roll over.
And of
Yeah.
course, those who are considered, sort of like if you support Palestine, then you're like almost like an enemy of Israel. Yeah. So I wanted to mention Sonic Gabbard, Ann Mitchell, and Heather Montes Ireland, because they are the professors. Remember when we were working on the book, and we were like, oh my God, we got to get someone to write about the Don't Say Gay movement. And I was just so proud that these three professors from our Women and Gender Studies department stepped up, and it's excellent. So if you get the book, or you could borrow one of mine, please read that chapter. But what's at stake? Okay, I've said it over and over again, so I'll read my own quote. The battle over what can be learned and taught is nothing short of a struggle for power. With one side seeking to preserve white supremacy, there are some people, believe it or not, who believe that this country is for white people. And they believe they want to promote a patriarchal society. What do you think the whole abortion rights issue is about? They want to support capitalism, and certainly there's nothing wrong with capitalism until it just sort of overruns the interests of workers and of even us as consumers. But certainly, this is being done at a tremendous cost to a democratic society. In my chapter entitled The Epistemology of Ignorance and Its Impact on Democracy and Higher Education, I argue that, well, actually, I was intrigued by yesterday when our president, Robert Manuel, did this forum on the future of higher education, and particularly the issue of immigration. He was joined by our Attorney General, Kwame Rael. And so they were having a free floating discussion. And one thing Kwame Rael said that I thought was just really telling and reminded me of this chapter he said that there has been a dumbing down of America. And I think you mentioned that too, Ellen. There's been this dumbing down of America. And what I argue in this piece is that there is a system that really of knowledge attainment in this country that literally impedes the ability to accurately understand social reality and its attendant racial and social inequities and implications. For example, if you can do away with history, right, then no one really understands why it is that disability is a protected class and why we demand and ask for equity for people with disability. If you do away with the historical struggle of women or LGBTQIA, right, then it's sort of like people don't fully understand DEI or the need for DEI. So this is a system of knowledge attainment that impedes the ability to accurately understand. And this obviously is a strategy. It is an absolute strategy that not only has an impact on our ability to think about policy measures, to be able to evaluate policy measures related to inequitable circumstances, but it also impedes our ability to be good citizens, democratic citizens, and elect public officials who can promote the people's interests. Okay. And so erasing history, this whole thing about let's get rid of CRT, don't talk about gay, don't talk about women unless it is associated with the family and children, you know, it has political purposes. And that political purpose confines us to this era that many of us would like to forget. Okay. So what we know about the past, even though it is promoted as something that is static, but what we know about the past is fluid, right? And it is a mediated experience that is given legitimacy through our educational system and certainly through education, higher education. So if you can impede what is being taught in higher education, then of course people just don't know, and they are given to demagoguery and all sorts of lies and baiting, race baiting, immigrant baiting, women baiting. I mean, it goes on and on and on until we look at the world and see that we are all fighting one another, right? I choose love, and I'm sure Jennifer and Ellen do too. This is exhausting, and I'm hoping that this all will have a leveling effect that we're going through to the point where people come to understand that we have more in common and that our lives are inextricably bound to one another. As Frederick Douglass said, America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds
Yeah,
herself
I'm not part of this.
to
No.
the future. And this is certainly not new. If you look at the debating regarding immigration, these are some old cartoons. Oh, freeloaders. Oh my God, Black people are taking over. They're going to rule the government. The Chinese scare. I mean, it just goes on and on. The constant fear of the other, right? It doesn't promote a society where we can coexist in air of sort of cooperation to handle some of our largest challenges. If we are fighting one another, then certainly we are not seeking solutions to some of our seemingly intractable problems. So, what must be done? That is the question, of course, and we're making good time, which is really, I'm always nervous about, I'm always used to talking in at least 90-minute segments or 3-hour segments. And so I always have a problem with time. But we get down to that final question. What must be done? Ellen, what must be done?
Okay, that's pretty easy. We need to join together. We need solidarity. During the 1930s, when the union movement began to heat up, what's their theme song? Solidarity forever. That, of course, is what you were just so eloquently talking about the need for. We need to work with each other. We need to work in a collective way, making sure that we keep the big picture in mind. And, I would start with the fate of the earth. I mean, we just saw Los Angeles burn, and then we're going to lose all the immigrants. So the American economy is going to tank. There's no question about it. So just those are the big problems. And of course, what the MAGA folks want you to focus on is what? The kind of language, if you use the word colonial, what is it? A settler colonialism in your class.
Yeah.
You'll be
And
fine.
you're woke.
So what we're seeing is the know-nothings against a very, very frightened majority. We are scared. And I am praying, although I'm an atheist, that maybe enough people within the universities and then spreading out from there recognize what's going on, band together, and make what John Lewis called good trouble, so we can get to stop being afraid that we're going to, I just met a kid whose girlfriend is Chinese. She's a foreign student at Brown. He said, "Oh my God, my partner's going to be," and this was before today's action. Said, "What do I do? My partner's going to be deported."
The cruelty is just off the charts in terms of just messing with so many people's lives. Can I just add one thing? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Did you?
Right ahead.
It's funny because settler colonialism is being smeared as a kind of woke BS term for the certain kinds of contingents. Colonialism itself, colonialism, manifest destiny, those things are coming back,
Mm-hmm.
which is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, it is just so amazing to me. I'm a civil rights baby, was born in the 60s. And so I always thought that your trajectory was about more inclusion. It is about more rights to the point where we can all, meet each other in our institutions and churches, wherever we are, on equal terms. But of course, there are those who don't, in fact, want that. Jennifer, what specifically can faculty do to stem the assault on on academic freedom?
I don't mean to be alarmist. I mean, I've been saying that, right? We've all been saying that basically in working on the Senate resolutions and all the things I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years. I don't mean to be alarmist. Well, now we're here. I guess
Yeah.
I feel like faculty, this is going to be terrible to say, but I really feel this way. Faculty who are 50 or older, you got to be willing to be fired because young people just out of their career, babies, and you've got to think about what you're willing to risk right now. That's my feeling. I'm 55. I've made a career out of talking about academic freedom. If I don't stand by my word now, what good is my word? And so I have to be willing to take risks. I think we have to be willing to take risks, but then of course, absolutely what Ellen said about joining together, and I think labor unions are really critical right now because I mean, if you think about The cartoons that you gave Val in the slide deck are so interesting. And as you put it, they were about the other. But remember recently, the Washington Post cartoonist who wasn't allowed to submit her cartoon showing Bezos, Zuckerberg, etc., bending the knee and placating, and Disney placating at the foot of Trump. Bezos wouldn't allow that cartoon. So the capitalism, the tech industrial complex, as Biden said on his way out the door, labor unions are absolutely critical, whether they're professional labor unions like American Association of University Professors, American Federation of Teachers. Join your unions and work together. And then faculty who are older, more senior, take some risks.
Mhm.
Support your,
Yeah.
s-
Go
and
ahead.
then you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is support your students. They're the ones right now who are being kicked out of their dorms, kicked out of the country. We have to just lock our arms and uh, keep the ICE people away. And the ACLU, I think, is circulating various sort of guides how to deal with ICE, what you can do, what you can't do. And they're fighting back as much as they can. If you're like me and have a bad back so that I can't go on marches and demonstrations anymore, maybe I have to get my checkbook out and give them a little bit more. Sorry, my
Mhm.
sons, your inheritance may be somewhat smaller, but this is what your mother has to
Time
sacrifice.
for some sacrifices. I think we can't avoid that.
It's so amazing to me at this moment, the same people who are restricting what can be taught, what can be learned, right, are the same people who argue for free speech. The
Mm.
irony of it,
The
the
hypocrisy.
same people who are talking about eliminating DEI, and because it's against meritocracy, are the same people who are appointing people to the highest offices of the land who are wholly unqualified. It is so insulting. I'm like, this is like the biggest, I mean, it takes gaslighting to new
It
heights.
does.
And I often wonder, do they actually know? I mean, do they see the irony in this? But I don't know. And maybe it's an irrelevant question. The important point is to remember, as Frederick Douglass said years ago, power concedes nothing without a demand, never have, never will. If we preemptively fold, you
Yeah.
know, I personally just grateful to God that I'm at a university in a blue state with a mission to die for. If DEI is literally written in our mission because we, in fact, respect and value the dignity of all people, regardless of identity. And this is something that we have committed to. Yesterday's program on immigration made that commitment. Obviously, there will be some challenges. We don't know what is up the road, but I think to the extent that we can hold on to our values, right, will determine how long this nightmare lasts. And with that, I'm going to stop share and hopefully we can field some questions.
So we've got our first, I think maybe from Mark. Let's see, Mark, if we can have you unmute. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mark Moeller from the law school here at DePaul. Thanks so much for this timely presentation. I wanted to just go back to the sort of summary of academic freedom and ask a question about disagreement within the AAUP. And just by the way, I'm on the steering committee of our AAUP chapter here at DePaul. So, I mean, my sense is that within academic freedom world, I see kind of three disagreements. One is on maybe the scope of protection for extramural speech, or kind of what counts as protected extramural speech. So, for example, I get a sense that somebody like Keith Whittington, right, at Yale, that you, Jennifer, you've kind of done a little road show with him. I've watched some of the
That's a really mean way to put it, but yeah.
But the events that you've done with him, and I think he has
Dog and pony show.
Yeah. My sense is he has a broader conception of the protection for extramural speech than you do. The second is, right, collective versus individual. Is academic freedom a collective right or an individual right? I mean, you kind of characterize it, I think, very strongly as a collective right. He's kind of said, in his view, AAUP is kind of waffled between those two visions, and there are certainly some aspects of the AAUP's statements that suggest there's an individual component, right, to academic freedom. And then finally, it's in the areas where, like, the classroom and scholarship, where disciplinary judgment comes to the fore. I get the sense that, like, he has a thinner conception of kind of what's properly part of a disciplinary judgment, and you may have a thicker sense of what can go into disciplinary judgment. Like, I think you and Michael Berube would say, there are judgments about values, like that are properly part of disciplinary judgment, where I think Whittington is more skeptical of that. So I wonder, like, do you agree with that characterization? And maybe if you could just comment on where you see the state of the debate in AAUP on those areas of disagreement. Thanks so much.
I think that's really well put. And I think I would just want to also point out as a side note, but I'll get back to the bigger issues that you point out. But a side note is that there's a kind of irony in the fact that the people who, me and myself and Michael Berube, who see themselves as much more on the left, are the ones calling for a thicker conception of academic freedom that would distinguish itself from free speech. Because, of course, free speech has long been seen, and that just had to do with our court system. We had a Supreme Court for a long time that that created a context in which free speech did benefit to a large degree civil rights, the inclusion of new identities and gay rights, etc. And I don't think we have that court now anyway. But that was why free speech felt like it was on the side of progress. We've seen free speech kind of weaponized in a lot of ways, and we've seen the gaslighting of the way that free speech is talked about, that Val talked about. But I think, Mark, your summary is really good. And I do think that I'm going to say it's not untrue, which is, it's true. I'll just say it's true that there are different AAUP documents. You look at one AAUP document, it seems to tilt a certain direction. You look at another, it tilts in another direction on this front. So it's not a surprise that you have people like Whittington, who I think probably comes from a libertarian kind of point of view. And so the certain kind of free speech relationship to academic freedom, I think, kind of comes half consciously out of that kind of libertarian point of view. Or John Wilson, who writes in the Academe blog, but is very much wants to say that academic freedom and free speech are the same things in order. And I think they see it. They see it as the widest possible protection for faculty speech. But I don't think, given our current context in the last 5-10 years, that it actually is. It's the sort of dumbing down and the devaluing of everything becomes opinion. So if everything is allowed, everything is also opinion, alternative facts, your opinion versus your opinion, and sort of the dismissal of expertise. It's part and parcel of the dismissal of expertise. And so I think what Michael and I were hoping for before, when we finished the book, it was right when Biden won, and I think it made the book a lot less feel a lot less urgent. But we were hoping for faculty to sort of take control of the ways in which other faculty might be being opportunistic with their with their research, with their title, and being bought out by oil and anti-environment, and sort of just kind of police ourselves, and I won't go on and on about that, because it also has to do with the fact that we've got, that Ellen mentioned, that we've stopped tenuring people and stopped bringing people onto the tenure track. So it's complicated, but we were thinking that a kind of renewed appreciation for academic freedom might actually be a kind of guardrail, So much for that, right? But that's what we were thinking.
And let me
Thanks again.
add that even the AAUP is rethinking this. The AAUP received a grant from the Mellon Foundation, and they have these academic freedom fellows all around the country who are looking at this. And I think that, there is this push for AAUP to sort of re-envision academic freedom for such a time as this.
Yeah, I would add, as somebody who is on the front lines of that in many respects, because I'm on Committee A, which is the group that is going to be doing that rethinking of academic freedom and is in the middle of doing it, and doing it much too slowly for my taste, but it's still much faster than it used to be. The organization is much more activist. There's a new leadership in place that is very committed to collective action, that is very committed to collective bargaining, and in the broadest sense, in other words, thinking of, basically what's the employer? The employer is the university, and everybody is getting their checks, their paychecks are being signed by the same bursar or whoever treasurer it is. Whether you're a painter or a groundskeeper or a librarian or a doctor in the hospital, the same signature is going out on your paychecks. Of course, nobody gets paychecks anymore, but going into your banks. So there's a much more useful, I think, collective sensibility within the AAUP. But I do want to point out that there's still this individual right. And the individual right is for people not to be fired because of their politics by their employer. And to a certain extent, that's a First Amendment right, but it's also academic freedom in a kind of classic way. And it's already happening, as we well know, because if you take the wrong kind of stance, you can be considered anti-Semitic and depriving others of their rights. If you say, for example, that Palestinians are human beings. So I think we have to think, as Jennifer has been doing so brilliantly over the years, and you too, Valerie, putting everything in context and not being fooled by the use of words that are just out there to confuse you, but to really think about reality and think about power. And we have to start thinking about power and how do we get it and how do we use it and how do we not get diverted into sort of squabbling among ourselves.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for that. I want to read a question that's in the chat, and then Marcy, Jay, and Quinetta, I'm coming to you all. So a question is, how would you advise junior faculty whose research interest is in the area of DEI/anti-racism? Because not only will funding be challenging, but given the election results, there is fear that the merit of this research will be judged harshly during the tenure process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? Unfortunately, we might have to change the language as the universities around the country are in the process of doing. But whether you call it DEI or XYZ, it's all the same. It's all about treating people who have different identities, who have previously been excluded from institutions and processes as if they're human, right? I always say that we have to concern ourselves with the least common denominator, and that is membership in the human race. Okay, And so no matter your sexual orientation, your identity, no matter whether you have a disability or you're older or you're from a different country or you're from a different religion, I think that there is still place to do that type of work, um, research, as well as to teach that sort of information, and not, to be so fixated on it being DEI. Over the years, I mean, we've gone from equal opportunity to affirmative action to DEI. Some people call it DEIJ. I mean, the name really doesn't matter. It is just the concept of recognizing the dignity in all human beings.
Thanks, Val. I want to, RC, we're asking you to unmute so you can ask. Yep.
Yeah, pardon me. Thank you all for this event and for all of your work over all these years on such a critical issue and such a constantly evolving issue. And I think I wanted to follow up on Ellen's last remark about recognizing where we have power, with probably more a comment than a question, but it's already been under discussion at this university that the administration is not only likely to stop funding like it tried to with its memo yesterday, but also by restricting federal funding for colleges and universities in terms of what majors or specific majors or career paths students choose. And this seems to me like a powerful pivot away from using politics and identity, which have been effective, or maybe also using it in addition to politics and identity, probably, to really using basically the heavy cudgel of students' financial burdens and their financial futures to really make it impossible for a lot of colleges and universities to continue doing business if, say, they defund entirely the humanities. So this is my long prelude to saying I think maybe where we've under-recognized power is in our students. I think there was a recognition of the power of our students when they dared to stand up in support of Palestinians in the spring, and they've been shut down. But I've been encouraging my students to start to organize about in protection of their academic freedom to choose whatever major in studies they want, in that they're paying for them, and also seeking funding for them. Because I think we've neglected this, that our students have, frankly, more power than we do, especially at this university, and so a tuition-driven university. So I would just like to encourage us all to have this on our radar, that this is trying to restrict federal funding in terms of what major students choose, what fields of study they choose just in general, is not just going to affect us and our academic freedom, but significantly our students. And there's, I think, spreading the word as much as possible to our students to try to get out in front of this will be really, really critical. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Jay?
Great. Thank you so much for this very helpful and timely conversation. I want to go kind of micro here because the ideas are big, and I want to take it back to something that you discussed earlier in this, but also something that's been, part of the whole conversation nationwide about why DEI programs or individual courses or curriculum is so harmful to students who, might feel guilty or bad or whatever. I think my undergrads would call it butt hurt, which is an interesting, colorful concept. But when did students, and maybe they didn't, maybe this is just part of their talking points of the right, when did students become so sensitive to ideas that were antithetical or conflicted with what they believed when they grew up or what was common in their neighborhoods? I'm also speaking as a white male who's also now gray. So maybe my students don't perform this hurt in the courses that I teach. But I've not always been gray. I started teaching 25 years ago when I think students would have felt more comfortable talking back to me. But maybe that's part of the issue. My question is for the three panelists: is this a real thing that students get so hurt by the concepts that they feel are against who they are as individuals, or is this part of the motivation or the rationale for this kind of conversation?
I think it's a phony issue. What we have to do is say, give me some examples. This is what I've been noticing every time they try to shut us down, is they bring up the same old one story that's circulated throughout the mainstream media about these poor snowflakes. But of course, once upon a time, the snowflakes were the Black students who just wanted to be treated as equal. But here, these, I think there are, what are they called? Urban myths. It's an urban legend that there are all these poor white fraternity guys who just can't express themselves by hanging nooses on the trees in their campuses. It's
Yeah.
fake.
I think it's also really place dependent. So for example, I'm at Portland State, which is an urban, tuition-driven, working class in many respects and minority serving institution. And my students are definitely not snowflakes. So for example, if I use the wrong pronoun, they're like, and I catch myself or they correct me and I say, I'm sorry, they're like, whatever, it's fine. If I've called one student of one ethnicity by the name of another student in the same ethnicity, they don't, and I apologize, they have no problem. Some of my friends at Reed College, just across the way, which is a very sort of wealthy, very expensive, small liberal arts, where the students feel much more free to become. I don't know. They're not under. Some of them might be under some similar constraints as Portland State students, but they maybe have a lot more time to devote to their studies. That's for sure, than my Portland State students. Some of my friends at Reed suggest that there was a kind of this kind of militant ethos around certain things. But I ultimately agree with Ellen around the fact that, for example, I think when I first started using when trigger warnings first started to circulate, I thought that's absurd. And now I just think it's nice. It's sort of like if I'm going to show a clip where there's a sexual assault, because I do film, right? So I mean, people are watching things that are viscerally, image and sound. I mean, you can reading literature too, but film. If I'm gonna assign something that I know where there's a suicide or something, why not give them a gentle heads up for those people who really have PTSD around those things? Why not? Why isn't a more compassionate society what we want? So my thinking has really evolved and gone this way and that, and I think it's complicated. But mostly, I'm in Ellen's bucket that it was used. It was a kind of right-wing tactic to smear students.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we've always dealt with cognitive dissonance, right? I mean, students come in, they're freshmen, and in many instances, because of the concerted effort to erase certain history, right, or certain discussions in the classroom, they're not aware. They're not aware of this material that many of our departments teach. And so they are challenged by it, and that's all right. And I think we have to tell our students it's all right to be challenged. That's how you grow. That's how knowledge expands. And so I think the difference here is that, by expanding knowledge, you could be, fired or get in trouble.
So we are running just a few minutes behind, but can we have the two more questions, Quinetta and Kevin? All right, Quinetta, are you able to? Yep, you're unmuted.
Yes, I can unmute, but I cannot turn on my video. But anyway, thank you so much for this very timely presentation. So I'm in the chemistry department, and I don't have these types of CRT type discussions that come up in my classes. but I wanted, so excuse my being naive in saying what I'm about to say. The president and the Congress take an oath to affirm the Constitution. So it seems to me that, or I'm asking, couldn't it be possible for faculty who do not want history, to be erased, and faculty who want, whose expertise is in DEI, to ground their class material in the Constitution, right? Because the Constitution is a record of our United States history. So, for example, if I wanted, it seems to me that if I wanted to teach a DEI class, I would probably point out Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, which in my view is firmly rooted in D, E, and I, that is based on racism, because that section includes the part about representation of the Congress, and it mentions the three-fifths rule. So that is DEI, because they wanted diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, North and South, populations, those industrialists and those who are farmers. That's diversity to me. That's equity, using the three-fifths rule, and increasing representation numbers. That's equity to me. So it just seems to me that faculty who teach these types of classes could get some cover, because apparently these people, the people who are, causing a lot of trouble, are standing up for the Constitution. It seems to me that faculty can get some cover by introducing their classes under the cover of certain sections of the Constitution. Thank you.
Yes.
If the complaints were always in good faith and there were always good faith people adjudicating the complaints, yes.
Kevin?
Yes, hi everybody. Thank you to our panelists. What a wonderful discussion. I was curious, as a member who's not a faculty member at my university, but a staff member. Oftentimes when I talk with staff, they will tell me that they are not in a position where they feel that they can advocate or express themselves appropriately. In your opinions, being in higher ed for so long, how would you recommend staff to engage with some of these, issues that students are facing, but also what, in some ways, like our faculty peers are facing with the limitations on academic freedom? What would you all recommend for a staff member? How would they get involved?
Join the union, organize the union. The individual can't do very much, but if the staff organizes a union, even if one of the problems is that for years, especially tenured professors, just felt they were too professional to have anything in common with anybody else who worked at that university. I think they're becoming quite aware that they have much more in common with them. So I would suggest, going to faculty members, if they have an AAUP chapter, if they have an AFT chapter, if there's an SEIU chapter on the campus. There are lots of national unions that are organizing, not necessarily teaching faculty on university campuses, and join up with them. And if there isn't one, you can always start a union. But that is what I would suggest for staff members, because you're very vital people. They couldn't operate the university without you, and you have power. You just have to use it.
Yeah.
Right.
And through the union, you can build in more protections so that you're less of an at-will employee. Build in some things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just think just being informed, Kevin is modest. He is the former, what was it, president or vice president? Kevin.
I was both.
Yeah, okay,
Vice
both
president and president.
of the SGA. And so, he has influence in the student body as well as now as a staff member, the staff. And so, you know, having the discussions and understanding that these are our students, right? These are our students. As I tell students all the time, this is your DePaul, right? And so, you know, you owe it to yourself. It's you know, incumbent to view the institution as your institution that upholds the values and mission of the university. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Valerie Johnson, Dr. Ellen Schrecker, and Dr. Jennifer Ruth for this. This was well needed. I just quickly want to share, I've shared it in the chat, several events we're having. February 4th, we are having workshops for students on presenting at conferences. February 17th, we have 2 events. No Justice, No Liberation, No Peace, a conversation with 2 Black and Dr. Russell A. Moat. And then Dr. Shira Malik is hosting an event on the Sudanese Revolution. Thank you all for attending, and we will hope to see you
Could I
soon.
say one last word?
Definitely.
Okay, I really hope that all of the participants, and in fact, everyone at DePaul, faculty, staff, or students, understand that at this moment, if never a moment, it is so important to practice grace and humility, right? Jennifer mentioned that,
You
hey,
always do that with me.
I know, because I have a good friend named Ginger.
know.
But anyway, so you know, it's like, you know, we all make mistakes, right? Inclusion, we don't realize and recognize, acknowledge that this is new, right? There are groups that have been formally excluded. Now they've entered into our institutions. Sometimes we get it wrong, right? And so to have humility to say, my bad, I'm sorry, you know, and on the other hand, to show people some grace is so important in this moment, because as we look at people, you know, we never know the challenges, the struggles that they may be encountering. They may in fact be in a mixed status family, you know, facing deportation. So please be kind.
Thank you all. Have a good
Okay.
afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.